Today's guest has over 1,300 episodes on their podcast. That absolutely blows my mind. Mark has been podcasting since 2017, and his cadence is quite interesting. One year, he was trying to release one episode every single day, which is so ambitious. And he talks through what that looked like, how frustrating it was getting to burnout in around October. We also talk about how he honed in on his niche, but still has a little bit of a more broad podcast and why that works best for him. We also talk about how he came to the decision of how often he has guests on, what those interview styles look like, and so much more. So if you want to learn from someone who has over 1,300 episodes, stay tuned because this is such a wealth of knowledge from Mark, also known as Mr. Productivity. Please join me in welcoming him to the show. Hello, Mark. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. If you could start by telling everyone who you are, what you do, and a bit about your show.
Well, I'm Mark Struczewski, but everyone on LinkedIn knows me as Mr. Productivity. That's, by the way, Mr. all spelled out, M-I-S-T-E-R. I actually registered that name, by the way. Cost me a fortune. But I am a productivity coach. I work with HR professionals, mainly HR directors and managers, people in SHRM, the Society for Human Resources Management. And what was the third question you asked me?
About your show.
Oh, I got a little show. It's only been around for 7.5 years and over 1,300 episodes. It's called, you ready for this? Spoiler alert, the Mr. Productivity Podcast.
So you started your podcast in 2017 and little show, he's being modest because there's 1,300 episodes there, according to Apple, right? And I know you gave me the exact number when you pitched to be on the show, but like, that's not little at all. You've been doing it longer than most people have even been thinking about doing a podcast. So what was that journey kind of getting into, all right, I'm going to launch a podcast now? What was that thought process for you?
I've got to give all credit to Gary Vaynerchuk, also known as Gary V. So in the spring of 2017, I happened across a video of his that he said, the future is voice and audio, and everyone needs to have a podcast. And when I saw that, I'm like, well, I listen to podcasts. Could I have a podcast? I mean, I used to be a radio DJ, on-air personality, spinning the hits, if you will. And I went to Google and typed in those fateful words, how do I start a podcast? And July 7th, 2017, I launched episode number 1. And I just love the whole podcasting platform because people will have YouTube watching parties, but no one has podcast listening parties. So people who are listening to this conversation right now, we are literally in their ears. They could be out walking the dog or out for a walk with their newborn or whatever. We don't know where they are. They could be on a plane. They could be on a bike ride. And I just love the intimacy of the podcasting platform.
I could not agree more. I am someone, when I would listen to podcasts very avidly, I'd listen to them on the drive to and from work, but I'm also a mom, so I would have to have my ears open when I would be with the kids. And so my other listening time was in the shower. Like you can't really get more intimate than that of like listening to someone talk about business or talk about productivity while you're taking a shower, right? It was like the only time that I could get to myself and be like, I'm going to listen to a podcast. And it's true.
And that's a good time. That podcast is only one way.
Right. Exactly. I'm curious if this has happened to you. I know it's happened to me where someone will get either on the phone with me or meet me and they're like, I listened to your podcast and I can't believe I'm talking to you. And it's like, I mean, what? I'm just a person. I'm just a podcaster. But they hear my voice in those intimate moments, in those moments while they're going about their daily life that they know me probably better than, anybody else does because I'm in their ears constantly. And they're like almost fangirling a bit about meeting me. So has that ever happened to you?
Well, I'm a bit of a hermit, so I don't like to leave my house from Houston, Texas. But my wife and I were at a small group with our Bible study class just a couple days ago. And it was the first group. And we went around, told each other what we did. And then, I said, I'm Mark. I known as Ski, but I'm also known as Mr. Productivity. And I've got the Mr. Productivity podcast. And they're like, oh, you got a podcast? I'm like, well, yeah. I'm like, whoa, what's it called? Well, the Mr. Productivity podcast. How long you been podcasting? Oh, since 2017. Oh my gosh. And it's like, they're like so excited. It kind of made me feel good. Sometimes it is lonely when you're a podcaster because, you know, we're in our home offices usually, and we're just talking to a microphone, looking at someone on the screen. But when someone else gives you credit, like, oh, I listened to your episode, I really like this episode, or someone emails you, it makes us feel real good. So if you are listening to Lisa's podcast right now, it would mean the world to her if you would take the time to send her a message, find her on social media and say, hey, because you probably think everyone does it, but because everyone thinks everyone does it, no one does it. So reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes. So often people are like, oh, I'm not listening. I can't hear anything from my audience. My audience isn't talking to me. Tell them to talk to you. Tell them to send you a DM. Tell them, hey, reach out. I am here. I'm just a normal person and I respond to all my emails or I respond to all my DMs. Like that is an invitation that I think as podcasters, we should be giving our audience. Now, moving forward a little bit with your business being focused on HR professionals, is that your podcast focus as well, or is it more general, or how did you kind of decide what content you were going to have in there?
No, my podcast is basically focused on, I said the word basically. I hate when people say basically. I just said it. The show is geared toward general productivity. So I've had leaders on my show. I have authors who've written books that are incredible. I've had people on my show that tell you how they're productive as a solopreneur, as a small entrepreneur. I'm going to have someone on my show eventually who's in the HR field. So my podcast is more general. And the reason why I focus on HR professionals, I took a boot camp not too long ago, and the guy said something very profound. He says, the niche doesn't matter, but niching matters. And when he said that, I'm like, what? He goes, niching matters, but the niche doesn't. In other words, the whole point of a niche is to keep you focused. Otherwise, you're just throwing spaghetti against the wall. Now I'm focused on HR professionals, you know, people in SHRM, HR directors, HR, managers. But I help people the same way. But the problem is, if you know this, if I come out and say, I can help everybody, well, then I'm not speaking to any one particular group. So I decided not to make my podcast HR professionals because most of the stuff I teach people is universal. Now, HR professionals have a little bit of issues because someone may get fired. There may be a conflict at work. Someone may lose a loved one, layoffs. So they've got what I call fiery arrows. And that's a term one of my HR clients gave me a number of years ago. But the podcast is more productivity in general.
I think that it's important, especially with that number of episodes, that you have something of a more general idea. I've been looking at a lot of people lately doing more limited series when they're really niching down. And so instead of going on to have 1,300 episodes specifically for HR professionals, it's more of, all right, let me do 25 really focused topical episodes that are going to hit their pain points, that are going to sell my products or services, that's going to get that end result. And then I can cycle through those in my social content of like, all right, we finished episode 25. Let's go back to episode, 1 and talk about that again, because the content is relevant. But I do like that you have this more general idea. Your cadence is very interesting. And what I love about this is that there's no one right way to have a podcast or to produce a podcast or to release your podcast. I would say as long as it's coming out monthly, keep going if that capacity works for you and works for your audience. Now, your cadence is, I want to say every few days. I was tracking it to see if I could find some type of particular consistency, but I'd love to hear how you came up with this decision to release so many episodes within a week or a month, and then how you decided on that cadence.
Well, there's no magic. I just picked my current cadence. So video interviews come out on Mondays and video solo episodes come out on Thursdays. So here's the deal. I recently switched my podcast over to Spotify for podcasters because that's the only way you can have a video podcast on Spotify. I don't get why people want to watch two talking heads, but it is white hot right now. So I put my podcast on YouTube and I put my podcast on Spotify, and the rest of the world gets it on audio. The reason why I have so many episodes is right before Christmas in 2020, had this crazy idea that I'm going to release an episode every day for 1 year. Now, I didn't realize that Gary Vaynerchuk had 15 people on his team so he could do this. And so I was doing that. For a while, I was doing really good. I had all these interviews, and a couple of issues popped up. Number one, if a guest canceled, then I had to stop what I was working on because I had to create an episode. I promise one every day. The other thing is by June or July, and if you go back to 2021, December 2021, you can see I got really lazy with my guests. Back then, it was called the Mark Struczewski podcast, but it was still a productivity podcast. And if people had a microphone and could talk, they could be on the show. And I kind of got crazy with my guests. Now, it's not their fault. It's my fault. So I made it till the second week of October of 2021. And I told my wife, I can't do this anymore. The stress is too much. It was just me. No one else was helping me. And I was not working on my business. My podcast, I don't monetize it, except I get people to go to my website. Like when I'm going to guest on your show, I get people to go to MrProductivity.com. I don't monetize it. So I'm like, why am I spending so much time on my podcast? So now what I do is I do the interviews and my wife does all the editing. My Thursday episodes, I found I had all these episodes of videos I had on YouTube that were unlisted. You couldn't get a hold of them, but the content was evergreen. So what my wife did, I made a modern updated outro, and my wife goes through, re-edits it. They're like 8-9 minutes long, and she stitches this outro, and I release those on Thursday because the content's great. I'm watching the content like, well, this is, I got a goatee and I got different glasses, but other than that, the content's great. And so that's what I've been doing. It's a nice cadence. I've got interviews scheduled all the way through December. I'm doing good, but I'm really picky about who comes on my show now. I'm not going to make the mistake I made in the summer of 2021.
And I feel like once you get to the point too of having so many episodes, you get to be picky, right? So like we have a client where she's at 230 episodes of a weekly cadence since 2020. And she's like, actually, I don't have to talk to you. I have a backlog of really incredible people that I've talked to, and I don't need you. Like, you need me because I've got the audience. I've got this. Like, you better show up well in your pitch in order for me to say yes to you. And you're allowed to do that, right? But I feel like when you first start, you're like, I got to have guests and I got to have all these people and I'm running out of content ideas. And it kind of, this lack, right, mindset that kind of jumps ahead of you. But once you get to the point where you're like, no, my audience has a backlog to listen to and I can show up as the expert now and I can pick and choose who's on my show. So I love that you were able to come to that decision. And then offloading that. The editing really does. I mean, we tell people if you want to edit well, it takes about 4 times the length of the audio. So if you've got an hour-long podcast episode, you're looking at about 4 hours. If you're just skimming through it and getting through it and editing it down to however you want. Take that a step further if you're editing for content. So say you need to move sections around or you want it to be more based on what the listener would need or would expect, how the conversation should flow. That's so much more that goes into it. Video versus just audio editing. There's so many different elements that I don't think people realize. And the fact that you were doing all of that yourself on a daily podcast, like for anyone who's listening and cannot see my face right now, but I'm just flabbergasted because I would have been burnt out after February. So I cannot imagine even showing up daily in that way. And I also am quite a hermit and do not like seeing people or being around people. And anytime that I have any more than 2 interviews in a day, I'm like, I can't do anything else today. I'm burnt. Like, I'm done. I am done. I've seen too many people. So I cannot even imagine doing that. And kudos for you for getting to October because I could not. Now, you mentioned something that I want to bring back. And that is, you said you have episodes recorded up through December. Now, we're recording this in September. How did you come up with the decision that batch recording was going to be your friend, minus the year that you were like, all right, every day? But I mean, we're a couple years past that now. What does that kind of look like for you?
Well, let me correct it because I probably said something wrong. I've got interviews scheduled through the second week of December. I only have 4 that have been scheduled and completed, and my wife's in the process of editing them. I have this policy of 91 days. So I will not book myself on a podcast more than 91 days out. And I will not allow people to book on my calendar more than 91 days out. I do pre-interview calls for all my guests. So you have the pre-interview call. And after that, you're probably looking at 4 to 6 weeks before your interview happens. And then you may look another month for the interview to come out. So I am being very cautious of who comes on my show. I made a mistake. One week, I didn't block out some dates, and I had like 4 interviews in 1 week. Now, I'm not going to cancel those interviews, but now, as soon as I get 2 interviews scheduled in a week, I go through and block it off on my calendar. So I don't want more than 2 interviews in a week because I got plenty of interviews. I got plenty of pre-interview calls. Most of these pre-interview calls, because I've already looked at their LinkedIn and social media, and they're probably going to be on a show. So I'm probably good. If I don't get any more pitches, I'll probably be good till the end of January. So when you have that kind of dynamic, it's not going too far out, but I've got plenty of guests. I'm not desperate for, I need more people on the show. And if someone cancels and I can't fill it, it's okay because I have at least 4 weeks out on interviews. If someone cancels, I still got a buffer there. So to me, it's the best of both worlds.
Yeah. And I feel like, too, when you go to promote the episode, it's still really fresh. Whereas for me, I batch too far ahead that I have to go back and be like, what did we talk about again? What was that episode about? But that works for me, right? That kind of cadence. So for mine, just for anyone who's listening, because I know myself and I know my summers need to be lighter. Also, people don't always want to be interviewed in the summer because life happens in the summer. And then in the winter, I just want to hunker down with a book and a glass of tea. Like, that's what I want to do. So springtime and fall time tend to be my like hustle go moments of the year. And so I will batch record like crazy during the spring for all those summer months. And then that allows me space in the summer because my team's editing the podcast. I can say, what do I want to talk about? What are the kinds of people that I want to talk to? And I can explore my creativity in a different way than if I'm like, oh no, I need somebody for next week, right? I can have that spaciousness in the summer. And then that allows me to do solos that are really impactful and really genuine in the moment rather than being like, oh yeah, I need something. No, we've got guests lined up. If I don't have anything to talk about, it's okay. And then in the fall, I hit the ground running again. And like we're recording this in September, end of September. It'll go live end of November, I want to say. But then I also have about 10 interviews already scheduled out for the next month. So I know, all right, that puts me through to the end of January-ish. Cool. Now I know I need to dial it back on the people that I'm saying yes to right now and say, hey, I'm booking for end of January through the spring. And that way people have that expectation. I also have it where someone cannot book something in 3 weeks for me. So it'll be 3 weeks out before they can book because I've already got so many guests lined up that it doesn't make sense to put them all on my schedule now. Just put them on later. It's okay.
Yeah, one of the things I pitched somebody on Podmats and they accepted me and they go, okay, the first availability I have is October 2025. I'm like, I'm sorry, what now?
Oh my.
Yeah, I'm slammed with pitches. Then turn off the spigot. I mean, I actually hid my Podmats profile because I have plenty of people to get me. If I don't have another person pitch me and all the pre-interviews make it on the show, I'm good to the end of January. For me to commit over a year out, I could be dead. I could not be Mr. Productivity anymore. So for me, 91 days seems to be the magic.
Yeah. And that comes with knowing yourself, right? And having that data to tell you, hey, this is what works for me and this is what doesn't. Going back to what you did, like productivity really is like the way that you can be best productive is to know yourself and know what works best for you, because a lot of the hacks or what somebody else is doing isn't necessarily going to work for you if your brain doesn't work that way. And if your lifestyle isn't that way, or your home life isn't that way, right? There's so many different variables to that people don't really realize. What would you say on the productivity side point of people who are like, I'm feeling frustrated with my podcast because I'm having a hard time keeping up, or I'm having a hard time showing up well? From a productivity standpoint, what would you recommend that people do?
You need to step back and go, okay, is this really moving the needle for me? Because there are hidden forms of procrastination. When you should be working on, I don't know, DMing your target market on LinkedIn, but instead you're worried about working on your podcast. Are you making money from your podcasts? Maybe you need to step back. And that's why my wife does all my editing, because I do these interviews. I do the interviews in my show, and I don't do anything else. That's it. I may spend some time on Podmatch for 5 or 6 minutes, but that's it. I mean, I have got to make money, and I need to be DMing and connecting with people who are HR directors and HR managers. That's where the money's going to come through coaching. I don't charge guests to be on my show. So I got to be really careful. Where am I spending my time? It's really easy to say, oh, I'm going to spend 6 hours on Instagram, but are you really moving the ball, or are you procrastinating? These are what I call hidden forms of procrastination. I think having a podcast is important, but you got to be careful not to go too far down the rabbit hole, because then you're spending all this time. Well, would that time be better spent networking on LinkedIn or not? I mean, I can't speak to everyone in the audience, but you got to think to yourself and go, okay, I do 2 episodes a week. I'm good through the end of December. I'm good, because that's not moving the needle. Now, I do love being a guest on people's shows like yours, but this is not where the money comes from. This is called brand awareness. So people go, oh, let me go to MrProductivity.com and see what he's all about. They're not going to just send me, I wish they would just send me $1 million. They heard me on your show. That would be great, but that's not reality. So this is part of my branding strategy, being on my show, being on someone else's show, and LinkedIn. So I try to funnel everybody over to my website, because I want to begin fostering the relationship. This is a long game. If you want to start a podcast, start a business, whatever, you have to be in it for the long game. There is no one magic thing you could do that is going to move the needle and all of a sudden, pow, you're the next Gary Vaynerchuk. It's a long game. And I think people get in and they're sadly disappointed. I've been doing this for a month and nothing's happening. A month? A month? Are you serious right now? You've been doing this a month? I wouldn't expect you to have any action after a month. I mean, come on, let's be honest here.
Yeah, I like to tell people, what would you expect if you started a YouTube channel today? Same expectations for a podcast. Like, you are not going to make tons of money. You're not going to get tons of downloads. You need to work on it. And to your point, if you are not making the money that you need to be making to keep your business alive and sustainable, then you don't need a podcast right now. You don't need to be working on webinars no, get in front of your audience, your potential clients, cash money dollars, make that, then launch the podcast. And I think that you have so much more clarity too around the content when you have the clients to work with, because you can speak to examples and you can speak to your ideal client in such a way more intimate way than just a theoretical, I haven't worked with anybody yet, but this is what you could know. You want to be an expert and also be making money. Like, you don't have a business if you're not making money. That's a hobby. I'm so sorry. Also not sorry, but it's true.
I bet you if I called my mortgage lender and say, look, I can't afford to pay you this month, but I got this great podcast. So like, that's nice, but we need the cash. So The reality is, when you are in a situation where I'm not making that much money or I'm making no money, all right, well, maybe this is time Netflix goes, Hulu goes, Amazon Prime goes. If you have a sports package, Spotify, maybe you have to cut back on that stuff. A lot of people go, what am I going to listen to? Listen, do you want to have Spotify and be homeless, or do you want to not have Spotify and live in your home? So a lot of people think it's a sign of weakness. No, maybe you just need some more time. And maybe you have to go get a part-time job or a full-time job and working on a side hustle. There's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone steps up to the plate and hits a home run. Matter of fact, I don't think anyone steps up to the plate the very first time they go into business, hits a home run. They may strike out or whatever. So just say, hey, listen, I'm still going to do my business, but I'm going to go work full time and I'm going to do it on the weekends. But don't keep spending money hand over fist. If there's no money coming in, how are you paying for these services? I was just thinking about this today. I've got Canva Pro, and I realized to myself, I don't use 99.5% of the things on Canva. I take another image and I just copy it and change the text. Why am I paying for Canva Pro? It's not a question of can I afford it or not. I'm not even using it.
Yeah.
and so people don't stop and think about this. I was a podcaster for nearly 7 years before I bought this really expensive microphone. 7 years. I didn't buy it right out of the box. And I think people like, I got the best equipment. No, you don't have to have the best equipment. You need to be able to make sure you can afford this stuff.
Oh, so true. I'm glad you're saying that.
I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I love it. I think it's so good. And we do have an episode. We'll make sure we link it in the show notes where we had someone on who talks about auditing your subscriptions and how important it is that when you're paying for all these services, are you actually using them? And like, I do mine yearly. I should do it more than yearly, according to her. But yeah, get that time to just look at your bank statement and say, where is all my money going? Okay, good to know. Do I still use that? No. Is there something else that I can use? Or is there a bundle that I can get that would make this more cost efficient for me so that I can focus on the things that I'm really passionate about or do the things that I want to do in my life?
So I have the highest speed internet and I'm paying a fortune for it, right? But when I got that, I was heavily in the video. Well, my videos are much shorter now. So why am I paying all this money for internet? See, it's little things. It doesn't matter if you can afford it. If it's overkill, if you got an internet that's like 10 times what you need, well, you're paying for that. They're collecting the money and you're like, wait a minute. I'm paying for, I don't know, for example, 100 gigabytes and I only need 2 gigabits. Well, why am I paying all this money? So I think it's what you suggest is a good idea. Step back and going, okay, do I need this? Like Canva Pro, do I need this? I went through this morning and I found out when all my stuff's going to renew, whether SurveyMonkey. I bought SurveyMonkey for a year, haven't used it in a year. So I made sure I'm going to cancel that. I'm like, if I'm not using it, or if I'm using like 1% of it, why am I paying for it? Like I use Claude AI. I'm paying $20 a month. I'm not even using the features that cost money. So why am I paying the $20 a month? This is something, if you want to increase your chance of success, you got to look and go, why am I paying all this money? If we stop the recording right now, that's all they did, they would get a lot. So please do an audit on your subscriptions. I bet you can probably cancel 50% of what you have because you're like, yeah, we don't even watch this channel anymore. Get rid of it.
Yes. And same goes for your podcast or things that you're putting your energy into that are not serving you and not helping you achieve your goals. And if that's your podcast, full permission to stop. It is okay to stop or to reassess or to take a break and say, hey, new season coming soon. Maybe we'll see. That is okay. We're all humans and we all have these phases in our life where we either want something or we don't want something. And that's up to us to decide. Nobody can tell us, hey, no, you got to keep going. No, do what's best for you, your mental health, your wellness. This has been so great, Mark. Thank you so much. I've appreciated this and had so much fun chatting with you. Where can people go to listen to your 1,300 episodes, hang out with you, get to know you, etc.?
MrProductivity.com, MISTER. It's got to be all spelled out. If you go to the other MR Productivity, I don't know where you're going. So MrProductivity.com. You sign up for my email newsletter, find out about my podcast, find out about my coaching, read my blogs, go to my about page and find out some quirky things about me, but MrProductivity.com.
And we'll make sure that we link that in the show notes for anyone driving or doing other things, showering while they're listening to this. If you want to grab that link as well. Yes, right? Thank you so much, Mark.
My pleasure.